Infinite's campaign. It's been quite a while since we've seen it, more than a year now, but this last Monday, we were given a 6-minute campaign overview showing off various gameplay and a lot of things we saw the last year, but in updated form. And you know, last time when that campaign was shown off, there was quite a lot of controversy about how it looked, and I made a video about it. And I think it's a good enough time as ever to talk about Halo Infinite's graphics again. And to do that today, I'm joined by friend of the channel, EposVox. Adam, how you doing there?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm great. I mean, a little bit caught off guard by this trailer. You know, it came out of nowhere, but here we are talking about it. And I think the first thing we should talk a bit about today to kind of contextualize this is the differences in the campaign here versus other Halos and the general gameplay that's being shown here. So, Adam, how would you describe the gameplay in comparison to previous Halos?
At least from what we have seen, it seems to be a huge departure, but also an evolution. You've got equipment and grappling hooks that are evolution of Spartan abilities, and you've got dodging and camo modes. It's kind of like if you took all the good stuff from Doom Eternal and kind of blended into Halo, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but then you have the whole open world, which is not something Halo has ever really done before.
Previous Halo campaigns, especially 1 through 3, I would say, had distinct level design, wide linear usually. I think the original Halo level, that's the second level of the first game, something like Silent Cartographer, a variety of levels in Halo 3 are this, where it's all very distinctly designed, but kind of wide, and you have a lot of choice, and there's designer-placed weapons everywhere, and designer-placed encounters, you know, here's a golden elite here, watch out, things like that. But here we're seeing something very different, where it does appear to be an open world, maybe open world light, with a dynamic time of day where it can be nighttime, dusk, dawn, whatever. And you go and almost complete missions, it looks like. Based upon this, there's in the video, it's rescuing of a number of Marines that were captured by Brutes and Covenant, or the Banished as they're called here. And another one that seems to be about destroying silos, some sort of energy silos. That is very different gameplay than we've seen in previous Halo games, and also a little bit less about the weapons you pick up along the way or the things you find along the way, but you can also seems to change your loadout at certain locations, like the character, Master Chief spawns a vehicle at one point for himself, as well as, I don't know, you can probably talk about this, Adam, but there seems to be some level of progression here too, right?
Yeah, there's basically like a whole skill tree almost out of Skyrim or another kind of RPG where you have various effectively like tricks your equipment can do. So the grappling hook can get this like electric stun ability that you can level up, and you got your dash can get camo after the fact. Like, it's very RPG-esque, which is pretty interesting, and I think will allow for a much bigger sandbox, but it's definitely not like you think about a Halo story and you're just progressing in a line. Like I said, you get a wider aspect to it, but this is very much kind of grinding to level up, and that is quite different. And it looks like there's resource management as well, which makes me a little nervous.
Yeah, some of the new stuff does make me nervous. Yeah, I don't know. I talked about this a bit on the most recent DF Direct that will come out on the upcoming Monday for people out there, but I'm a little bit worried here actually about the campaign, because I do like classic Halo. I do like very distinctly designed pieces in a game, level design especially, and this seems to be in a very different direction, one that is a bit more modern. I don't know. How do you feel about it? Are you positive, negative? What do you feel?
I'm cautiously optimistic. I think there's a lot of potential for fun, especially thinking back to that Halo level you mentioned. Like in the trailer, or at least in some of the talks, they were talking about taking inspiration from the Silent Cartographer. But realistically, going and picking up and rescuing Marines and stuff, that is very much what you did at the different hubs on Halo, which is cool. But we've also only seen this one chunk, so I want to know what the game looks like, because this little area we've been in can't just be the game.
Yeah, right. So like they've only shown off this one area, this one biome, as I'll call it, one mission play area. You know, the initial engine showing off of Slipgate so many E3s ago now, showed off like deserts, and we also saw in the multiplayer beta, there's more than just this one area in the game in terms of art they've already made for it. So I really do actually want to know what the rest of the game looks like more than this area, and something we haven't seen yet, unfortunately. So there's still a lot of unknowns in spite of this 6-minute video here. This where it kind of brings us into the known knowns, things that we've already known before. So we do have an open world here, and so that does have certain ramifications on graphical quality in the game. So you have this like wide open spaces. It means essentially that artists cannot touch every single area as they could to such a degree of precision due to time and all these other things. So it is a slightly less artist-driven game, I would argue, and part of that is the time of day changing means that instead of an artist designing the game, like say Delta Halo takes place at this time of day in in Halo 2. Here now, every single area that the artists have designed can actually be viewed at any single time of day. So that means it can look better at some times of day, maybe because it's not in shadow and it's like directly in sunlight, but at another time of day, it's like behind the shadow of a mountain and there's maybe no artificial lights there, so it's a little bit, drab and dark. That's one thing that happens when you have an open world game. So that's one thing that you have to consider when we're looking at this footage here. And another part of that too is that in games that don't use ray tracing or some form of tracing, real-time time of days can make lighting a bit harder to do because it all has to be updating all the time. That makes it more expensive to do really complex, high-fidelity lighting, indirect lighting specifically. That's something I talked about in my video last year, but things have changed since then. I think there's a lot of positive things that we can see already in this 6-minute trailer. What is one that came to your mind while watching it there, Adam?
Well, you forgot the most important form of tracing, which they have in this game, and that is brute tracing. They traced outlines around all the brutes.
Yeah, that is something that is definitely in the game. I don't know if I'm a big fan of that. I wasn't a big fan of it. I wasn't a big fan of it in the multiplayer, actually, necessarily, just visually.
But overall, everything looks more realistic. We're not plasticky. We got textures, we got wornness. Master Chief didn't float off into space wearing his brand new suit that he just changed into.
That's the biggest one, there's two shots of the Master Chief in this trailer that showed off really well. The one is the back shot that they showed, that initial campaign cinematic that they showed off even before the last gameplay demo. Definitely doesn't look like a plastic space marine. He's got all that wear and tear like you would expect. You can also see that in other aspects of the trailer where they've definitely adjusted the materials in the game to have more like micro reads and detail in them. Biggest one to point out is one that was a big controversy last time, is those hexagons, those Forerunner hexagons sticking out of the ground. My goodness, do they look quite a bit better when they have a bit more variation on them. Another thing I want to point out too is the last time when the Chief got in the initial trailer that we saw last time, got in the Warthog. One of the first things you saw when he got in the Warthog was he's driving around in actually not too dense areas with still a lot of pop-in grass, rocks, pebbles, whatever. They do show that off at one moment here, or at kind of two essentially, but at the one very specific one at about 1 minute into this trailer here, the LOD of the grass and the stuff near the Warthog as it's driving around is definitely not changing in such an obvious manner. I think that is definitely a positive here too.
And that's very important for such a big game. Like that would have been incredibly distracting with the way it was before, because it was pretty close. And that's one of the things with Halo. Like obviously you spend a lot of time running around and shooting stuff, but you have these big vehicle segments. I mean, most of the games ended with a driving segment.
Yeah, right.
And to be driving around and constantly have all that pop in would just be it would take you, even if you don't care too much about those details, like that would start to take you out of the immersion or experience a little bit. So I'm glad that it's smoothed out.
I agree with that too. I mean, there's some other stuff in here too that we didn't talk about last time because there were so many glaring issues, but it is nice to point out the fact that the sky rendering, the clouds, are actually done dynamically in a semi-volumetric manner, something we've seen in a lot of other open world games here. But here we're talking about one, targeting the base Xbox One, which is, not a very good piece of hardware, so that is always interesting to see. Yeah, we'll see. But there are some. My biggest critique last time around was essentially that, okay, with the dynamic time of day, things in shadow look really, really bad because their indirect lighting solution, whatever it was back then, was leaving a lot to be desired. And I already do see some positive things here in the trailer. I would like to point out in this one shot, for example, those hexagons, those Forerunner hexagons, they're in a shadow on the backside of a mountain here, away from sunlight. But bam, if you look at them, there's actually nice reflectivity there. They are reflecting what appears to be the sky, even though the sky from their angle is off screen. So that's, you know, something about the indirect lighting has changed, which definitely makes metallic objects look quite a bit better, I would say, specifically ones like that, like those hexagons there in shadowed regions. You can also see it at another point in the trailer where it's actually right towards the beginning, more or less, when Chief is electroshocking, grapple hooking onto a brute. And as he moves towards this brute, you can ping pong the shot back and forth. Look at the left-hand side here. You can see on the Forerunner structure here, which is this dark metal, you can see the reflective GI there, this indirect specular lighting on it, parallaxing very nicely with the camera. It really helps the material there look better. This is something that definitely in that first trailer they showed off a year ago was not there. This looks quite a bit better.
And you got the nice glow from the electric effect on the brute that's actually glowing the grass around it. But this does still highlight that you still have a little bit of the character models that have their own kind of brightness levels independent of the environment. And this has been a problem Halo has had forever. I think part of it's an accessibility, visibility thing, at least on the multiplayer side. But like when he's grappling into the brute, there's another brute and a grunt on screen, and both of them are just kind of like fully lit, even though there's no light source and there's no light around him. Like the brute is in complete shadow, and yet he's brighter than like anything in front of Master Chief. It's
this is one thing that I noticed at other points in the trailer was dynamic objects specifically still kind of look really glowy in the shadow regions. That brute that you talked about there's another shot right when the Marines are about to be rescued, and there's a brute in the camera shot there on the right-hand side. Rather glowy little brute there for being in shadow. There's only so much that can be done without forms of tracing in an open world game, so it's just one thing I thought I would have liked to have seen be better. Other things that I think I'm still not exactly completely satisfied with the graphical presentation in Halo. I think targeting the base Xbox One is definitely showing, there's just some legacy stuff in there too, maybe from the Halo 5 era as well. But one thing I want to point out is because I talked about it in the multiplayer beta that we've talked about multiple times on DF now, is that the number of animations in the game do not play out at the 60 FPS refresh rate. And there's there's a couple of very obvious ones actually, but one of the most obvious ones is right when the Master Chief uses that really cool spike gun that we also saw in the multiplayer beta. And or the flight, right? Like the FOZ, like when he zooms in with this thing, if you look at the zoom in animation, it's 30 FPS for no reason. I have no idea why they would do that. That's something Halo CE had before Master Chief Collection fixed it. As the animation's being reloaded or recovered, that also moves at an improper 30 FPS. It's not only 30 FPS, but it's like 2 frames are real, and then it waits 2 frames, which is not right at all. And then, you know, like while he's swinging towards the Banshee that he just grapple hooked onto, his arm is actually moving at 30 FPS in a non-proper cadence though at the same time. And that's something where I'm hoping that the final game fixes it, but the fact that we're seeing it in a gameplay overview 1 month or so before release is, I think, unfortunately the game is probably going to launch with this issue. And it happens for a lot of things in the game. We talked about it before multiple times on DF Direct, so unfortunately that's still there.
Yeah, that's one of those things that I was really hoping would kind of be shed when they're like, okay, we're scrapping the game, we got this whole new engine we're debuting, it's all new tech, and then like you mentioned, like this is one of those things that was a thing in CE, and they brought forward, kind of like how some of the Call of Duties have issues, and it's like, yeah, this was in the original Quake engine, and we just never fixed it. And this affects other things, because I find this one of the sticking points. Like, as excited as I could be for Halo, the animation, like, slowdowns for certain things are one of the things that honestly tainted my Halo 5 experience the most, especially in multiplayer.
Yeah, really?
And have other examples of that, like earlier in the trailer when he drops the Wasp off at the little hub base, it hits the ground and sparks fly up, except the sparks are not animated. They are a static like PNG that flickers on and off at like a frame per second. I've not seen a game that does this, that released before, you know, after I was born almost. Halo CE
It
did
is
not do
brutal.
this.
Yeah, I mean, just flash some Halo CE sparks here. I know, it's just like Halo CE sparks are quite incredible looking in comparison to this. And yeah, that's kind of stuff there where it is a bit jarring to see a game targeting 60 FPS, having those kind of issues, especially on something like Xbox Series X, which is where I think a lot of this trailer footage is coming from, due to the aspect of, if you look at a lot of the cinematics here and you actually do count the frames in them, step frame by frame, you'll actually see that they are dipping frame rate below 60 FPS rather often, which I do not imagine they would show if this game was running on some very high-end machine. Rather, this is some sort of work in progress, perhaps console build, is what I would imagine. And that's always a shame to see. But another thing that I want to talk about beyond that as well, I've already talked about like the glowing stuff. It seems like the game is still missing some sort of large-scale ambient occlusion. Other games do this, like Red Dead Redemption, for example, in open world. Red Dead Redemption 2 does this in a really great way, but they released an official screenshot that shows off exactly what I'm talking about, and it's one of the reasons why some of the areas do look still a little bit awkward. Looking at this official screenshot here, it's a little bit low res, the one they produced, but it's showing this base, and it's nighttime underneath this base, which is in shadow, away from the moonlight, away from the sky lighting. It's still like glowing underneath it. And that, you know, you can see there's some screen space ambient occlusion in there, adding in some halos and trying to ground stuff, but it doesn't get, you know, like large objects. Screen space ambient occlusion can't do that. You need some other system usually. And that's, you know, one thing you can see multiple times in the trailer, just kind of large mega structures and rocks and stuff. They do look a little bit floaty. And that's another thing that, once again, I don't know how they would solve it necessarily while targeting so many systems at one time, but that's one thing I was not a big fan of in the trailer.
Yeah, in one of the sections of the trailer when you are going to help the Marines, as much as we talked about how nice the hexagons are looking, there's actually some in the background on the rocks that just look like they're like painted on, like they're just this big bright glowing metal thing on the rocks in the background when the rocks are in the shadow. And
less than great looking. But another thing that I think drags down the visuals in general here, and it may have to do with the platform they showed it off on, which I'm not sure what it is the kind of shadows and the way they're done. The first thing I would like to point out is when the chief jumps out of the back of the Pelican and he's looking at the ground, for example, right below his feet where he's going to land. Just if you pause it there, take a look at all the stuff that's shadow casting and not shadow casting. This is picky, but it's actually a part of the macro image here. If you look at all the grass tufts and smaller bushes and shrubbery, most of that is not shadow casting, which, you know, there's performance reasons why you do that. But at the same time, it makes it almost look a little bit old school, and stuff looks like it's floating around, and it's an issue that something like The Witcher 3 had back in the day. It's one of the reasons why I think I know John doesn't like the foliage in that game. But, you know, that's one thing that stands out to me when all the other stuff there is shadow casting in a really nice way. And you know, and another thing that kind of ties into that is that when you look into the distance, there's a certain range at which shadows stop casting from things like trees, or they reach a certain resolution where maybe they're not included in the shadow map anymore. And that kind of just makes some of the longer range shots in the trailer, not look as awesome as they could be. You know, this game's targeting 60 FPS though, so it's always hard to be a little bit too critical.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of some VR games like early PUBG when you were, you'd snipe off in the distance and you'd lose all the detail in the distance, which at one point in time was like a way to get an advantage because it literally wouldn't render the things that obscure players. It kind of reminds me of that. And I understand why, but like,
it's, this, I mean, we're being critical here, but at the same time, there's the huge challenge of shipping a game that is 60 FPS in open world. So it's hard to know where exactly the bottlenecks lie. I'm just pointing out things that, that my eye notices, and some reasons why I think we've seen better or we've seen worse before.
You mentioned before that you think this is probably showing on Xbox Series X, and I think I have an idea of how it might end up looking better specifically on PC. is I noticed specifically, I was trying to like go frame by frame to see if I was missing it. There's either not much or just like really subtle motion blur and depth of field effects in play here. Like I don't really notice it much at all, and that could be used to mask some of the frame rate issues and some of the distant, draw distance issues, and it doesn't seem to be present at all. And maybe that's a hardware limitation of the system they were demoing it on, but I think that could help the presentation a little bit.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. In the multiplayer beta, there was 2 sliders essentially where you could control the blur, motion blur, and depth of field, and a variety of other post-processing effects. Honestly, those things obscuring problems is a good thing in a game like this, as well as obscuring problems in motion. Motion blur is actually pretty good at that. I agree with you there, and I would like to see that in the final game, and I hope it is. But that's it at the end of this trailer. I talked about this as well on DF Direct, where I was a bit harsher probably because I was just thinking about it and I was being less articulate. I am thinking that this is a better showing of the game than it looked before, visually and gameplay-wise.
Oh yeah.
But I'm still very skeptical about the gameplay structure in this game.
I think we got some interesting looks into some of these smaller innovations that they're doing. Like you got to see the AI picking up and swapping weapons, which was really cool.
That's
Adds
cool.
a little bit of a dynamic thing, especially if the Marines get to build your team. If you just pick them up and they fly off like in Halo CE, then that's not worth anything. But if you're building up this team of Marines that follows you around or something, then them swapping weapons and getting equipped would be really cool. You got the brutes that shotgun mount the rocket launcher. That was really cool.
That was nice, yeah.
Of course, my favorite shot was when the chief just drives the warthog off the cliff. Presumably, they're just all gonna die.
I mean, there was definitely some humor in the trailer that was gameplay oriented, like that one, and also, I mean, when they show Craig again,
old
they
friends,
say
and they call out
old friends, and they call out Craig. I'm pretty sure that's what that joke was about. So
that was the best.
I mean, there's other things we could talk about, like cinematic aspects about the way that looks in comparison to the old trailer, but that's stuff that I want to leave for John and Mai's coverage when the game does come out on December 8th. Really, a lot to say here, but let's leave all the rest of the coverage for when the game comes out. And Adam, thank you so much for joining me today and giving me 2 cents here. Yeah, thank you so much. And Adam's editing this video, by the way, so thank him for that. Yeah. If you did enjoy this video, critical discussion on Halo Infinite's new campaign overview that they just produced, well, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. If you're already a subscriber, hit that little bell in the corner right there to be informed as soon as Digital Foundry posts a video. If you want to help us out, support DF on Patreon to get years worth of our content in high quality for download, and join our Discord to talk to us, ask us questions, and participate in our community. And as always, if you want to talk to myself or Adam, follow us on Twitter, write a comment below. And this is Alex, bidding you auf Wiedersehen und
bye!